This is Joshua Hart here for Seconds Out. Delighted to be joined by Charlie Sims here in London. Charlie, it's a big week for the Matchroom stable as George Liddard headlines on a Matchroom show for the first time for the Commonwealth Silver title. Excited for this Friday night?
Yeah, definitely, and well deserved by George Liddard. He's been very active. Headlined the huge boxing show in December, which I think was great for him. Good preparation for a show like this, and ready to rock and roll for his first title. So very excited to watch him do that.
Why is now the perfect time for George to be stepping up to main event for a title?
I think, look, you have to go through the gears a little bit, and I think transitioning from amateur to pro, he had a decent amateur record, participated in some good tournaments, been in with some good fighters, but he needed to transition into the pro game. And although I think his style was always suited to the pro game, he needed to gel with his team. He needed to learn how to box coming forward, box going backwards, defend, and he's been putting that all together. And I think the last few performances we've seen are really, really good George Liddard. So definitely the right step up now against Derrick, Osaze, Commonwealth Silver title. So I think this is the right time for George.
What is it about Derrick Osaze that made him the right opponent for this fight for George?
Well, I think you could definitely say it's a good step up because Derrick's operated in and around the domestic level. He's only been beaten a couple of times, but by good opponents. I think you could probably say this might be a step too early for George if you wanted to look at it on paper, but we feel it's the right time now. He's ready to be let off the leash. He's looking very dangerous. He's hitting very hard. I think George Liddard's going to be a real force in the middleweight division, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see him in the next couple of fights get called up for the British title. Certainly looks like it's going to go that way, starting with this Friday night.
The higher up the levels he steps this year, are we going to maybe not see as much activity, a lot more time in the gym and preparing for these tougher fights, especially if your aim is to potentially be in the picture for the British title by the end of the year?
Yeah, and actually that's a good point because George's been so active. He's been in the gym constantly, and when you're in the gym constantly and fighting regularly, it's very hard to keep improving when you keep fighting all the time. So the breaks will do him good. Now he's doing the longer rounds. The breaks are going to do him really good because he's going to spend more time in the gym, be able to digest what he's actually working on in the gym with his team, and then he's going to fight. Whereas right now it's been like boom, 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 boom. So he needs to kind of slow that down as he's going into the longer rounds. But he was obviously we had a busy December. He was out doing a 10-rounder, although it only went one round, still prepared for it. Again, prepared for another 10-rounder here. Hopefully Derrick will give him a few more rounds. But I think he needs a good break after this one. Very busy 2024, busy first start to 2025, have a nice break, and then let's see what happens. I think the division's going to start opening up. Denzel Bentley's going to go on and do great things, so the British title's going to open up. So let's see where this lands after this fight.
Just looking back at the Huge Boxing show, obviously the debut of Huge Boxing, how big of a success was that show in your eyes?
It definitely was a success. I've had a lot of people in the industry come to me and tell me how great the show was, how great the atmosphere was. I was really happy with it. You never really know what you're going to get on the first one, and you kind of jump 2 feet in. There was a lot going on. We didn't really have a lot of time. 5 weeks to the show, from announcement. So it was a really good experience, and everybody's asking me when the next one's going to be. So I think we just need to look at the schedule for this year. It's been really busy already this year. I see a notice from the British Boxing Board of Control saying that they're at full capacity in March for shows, and no more shows allowed in March. So we were scheduling our show for the first week of April, and obviously if there's going to be 35 plus shows in March, then there's no point in doing it in April. So I think we'll probably look at doing it in May now, but I'll come back and confirm that date.
How big of a challenge has it been adjusting to this role as a promoter and putting on these shows and looking at planning these shows? You mentioned obviously March being fully booked for shows. Where do the obstacles lie? But do you feel while there is obstacles, there is a chance to possibly thrive in that May period?
Definitely. I also think this year is going to be a good year for promoters. I think there's going to be a lot of changes. There's way more broadcasters and streamers than there's ever been, and I think for what we're offering, we're a new school kind of operation. We've got young fighters breaking through, good young fighters as well. People like George Liddard, Jimmy Sains, Maisie Rose. there's good young fighters there coming through who are going to be challenging for big domestic titles. So I think we're offering something very good to the market. It's just where do we slot in and who with, and who can get on board with us and who can back us. So that's really what we're trying to figure out now. I think we're in a good position with it. We've got our first show done. Hopefully get a second show in May. And by the summer, I think we should be in a good position to start partnering with somebody. I know Matchroom have got Next Gen, and I think this is a brilliant model, very similar to what we do at Huge Boxing. But maybe there's something there where we can do something a bit more formal and look at expanding the Next Gen series.
Absolutely. It's moving away from this and looking at, obviously, some of the big news. I guess the biggest bit of news that's been dominating headlines in recent weeks. After 2 long years, we've got an official date now for Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank Jr., the highly anticipated clash. How delighted were you when you heard that the fight was finally signed, sealed, delivered, and no more negotiating to do?
Yeah, good. It's been a long time in the works, and just happy to get it over the line. Obviously, been working closely with my dad for like the last 2 years across it. He's been waiting for it to happen. Conor's been waiting for it to happen, so super happy for him.
From what you know, what has to change in Conor's camp for him to bulk up to middleweight, but in a healthy way, so he's not just eating those junk foods that are going to help him bulk up? How is he going to have to do that in a healthy and safe way?
He's got a really good team, firstly, and they know how to monitor his body. They've all worked together for a long time. They'll know how to get him into the peak performance for that fight. He walks around quite heavy, actually. If you know him, he walks around quite heavy. So it's still a big jump, though, 2 weight divisions, and you have to respect him for that. But it's a really fascinating fight, and one where I think the whole boxing community is looking forward to.
How do you feel this rivalry has changed from October 2022, where this fight seemed about the fathers, but in a lot of people's eyes, the rivalry has kind of changed and become a lot more about the 2 men actually involved in the fight? Do you kind of see it in that same sense?
Yeah, I just feel like obviously a lot's happened between then and now, and I think a lot's been said as well between both camps. So the rivalry isn't just a fantasy fight anymore. This is a real fight, and I think actually this was made it more interesting. I think people are genuinely more interested in how the fight can go. 2 years has passed as well, which means a couple of more years on Eubank's age, a couple of years of activity for Conor Benn. The fight was interesting back then. I think it's even more interesting now if you're looking at it from a boxing perspective. So very, very interesting fight. I'm looking forward to watching it. I think everybody else is, and we're all pretty happy just to see it happen now.
How does this rivalry between the sons compare to the one that the fathers famously had back in the 90s?
I mean, when you look at Ben Eubank in the 90s, especially the first one, it was such a big event. And it wasn't just a boxing spectacle, it was an event, and it was a national event. Like you look at, they sat on live air, signing the contracts. They was going on like Jonathan Ross show. It was a huge fight. I think sport and boxing has evolved quite a lot since then, but just totally different now. We've just got so many big streaming platforms, so much coverage in terms of people like yourself. It's going to get around quickly on social media. Anything that's said and done can happen in the click of the fingers worldwide. And I think back then it was just captivating because people had to watch the news, they had to watch TV to actually see the press on the fight, whereas now we have so much access to it. Completely different eras. And I think it's interesting, 25, 30 years later, where we're going to see the Eubank Ben names fight again.
Obviously, a lot of talk about Conor Benn jumping up, but there's also been a lot of talk about the rehydration clause on Eubank's end. Who do you feel faces the harder challenge? Is it Conor Benn moving up to middleweight, or Eubank Jr. boiling himself back down to 160 with that second-day weigh-in rehydration clause? Definitely
Ben. I don't think it is a boiling down situation for Chris, and I'll tell you why. I actually think it's quite fair, to be honest with you, because if you're a middleweight, which Chris has been campaigning at 160 for a very, very long time, especially in his last few fights. And he's also if you're looking at fighting at championship weight at 160, if you're going to fight at the IBF, that's a £10 rehydration clause at the end of the day. So it's no different to what the IBF world champion would have to do in the middleweight division. And that's a division that Eubank's been campaigning in. So if you look at who's really got who's facing the harder weight clause out of the two, probably looking at Benn because he's having to jump up. He has campaigned at 150, but ultimately he's been a 147 fighter throughout his career. And Eubank has been a 160 fighter, certainly in the back end of his career. So I don't think he's boiling down. I think they're making a lot of noise about the rehydration, but in my opinion, Benn's still making the jump of going up.
Where do you think all this uproar and noise has come from? What do you think was the main start of it all with the rehydration clause?
I don't know. Everybody's trying to find a way to gain some sort of momentum or gain some sort of excuses, I suppose. But like, Benn's not really making any excuses. He's just saying, look, I'm jumping up. So, no one's really saying, I'm taking the harder side of the deal. But I guess, there's a lot of talk in rehydration throughout boxing and always will be. But in my opinion, if you're a campaigner at 160 and you've got a 10-pound rehydration clause, that's no different to championship weight, in my opinion. So, yeah, I don't see it that way.
And then just looking at the fight itself, come the night, obviously, we're imagining there's going to be 60,000 plus people sat in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Whose side do you feel the crowd will be on come the night?
I don't know. You're going to have to see when you get in there. It's a really interesting fight. I think it's a massive fight. I think we'll have to see how the build-up goes. I think that will determine who the villain is and who the hero is and who the underdog is and stuff like that. I think it's a really good fight, and I don't know. We'll have to watch all the build-up to see.
Just lastly on this fight, how do you see Conor Benn getting on at middleweight against Chris Eubank Jr?
Yeah, I think he's definitely, in my opinion, the favourite to beat Chris Eubank Jr. I think he's got the power. I think he's got the speed, the youth, everything in his favour to go and do a demolition job on him, just like the Smith 1 did. I think he's got that in his locker to do it. But I just hope for everybody that it's a great fight, because I think we need big fights like this in the UK. 60,000. What's to say if this is a brilliant fight, we go to Wembley and do 80, 90,000 for the second one? And if that's a brilliant fight, let's do a trilogy. That's what we all want to see. These big rivalries, big British rivalries. And I just really hope it's a brilliant fight, just for everybody.
Do you feel we have missed these big British rivalries, especially since the start of Riyadh season and the influence Saudi have had? A lot of fans have said that they feel like British boxing has lacked a little bit. Do you feel this fight really rejuvenates those big rivalries that we can see in Britain?
Yeah, I mean, this is a proper rivalry because both men have a personal agenda against each other. But I don't think we're missing big British fights. We just see Joshua Dubois was a brilliant fight. That was part of a Riyadh season card. But yes, Riyadh season have wanted to take some of the big fights over to Riyadh. That's part of what they're doing. And part of that is compromise. We don't get to see as many big British fights or have been able to see as many big British fights on home soil, but they've taken the politics and the financial issues out of boxing, and we've had to watch some of the fights over there. But I think as and when they can do big fights here, they will. I'm not sure if Fury, Chisora or any of those fights were really part of the Riyadh season. I don't think they were. But, we see Fury Chisora, they were both big Wembley fights. And we just saw Dubois AJ, which I thought was a brilliant fight. So, that was a Riyadh season card. And then we're going to see Benn Eubank, which is a Riyadh season card as well. So I think if they get the opportunity to do a big stadium card like that, we're going to see it. I think if it's a toss-up between a big arena card, they might want to do it in Riyadh. So we have to compromise a little bit.
Just lastly from myself, Craig Richards has supposedly been pictured with Tony Sims and the Sims team recently. Is Craig back with Tony, or is he still with Shane McGuigan?
Yeah, I think that's probably going to come out sooner or later. I don't really understand what the situation is between Craig and Shane, and respectfully, I'm not going to comment on it. But I believe he's making the transition back to the Matchroom Tony Sims gym. And I think it was all mutual. I think everybody ended their stuff on good terms, but we'll have to wait and probably allow Craig to answer that, to be honest.
Perfect. Charlie, thank you very much for your time, and best of luck this weekend with all the fighters you've got on the card.
Cheers.
Cheers.